Yo, yo, yo.
Hello,
What's
hello.
up, everybody? We are back. Actually, live in full effect.
We
We're
got
about to,
we got the Facebook people.
no, we don't yet. Thank
Let's
you
go
for
grab the
reminding me.
Facebook
I'm about
people.
to get comfortable. Let me jump the Facebook fam in the house. Going live.
There we go.
It's the only one where there's an extra step. We're live on Twitch, live on YouTube, and live on Facebook.
And
Join us wherever you enjoy the most.
and not to forget we're actually alive, you know.
Alive and well. Still kicking. Here
And
on the edge of
screaming.
the awakening.
Kicking and screaming.
Kicking and sometimes screaming.
Yeah,
That's for sure. There's a
yeah.
lot of
Boy.
each going on. Hope you all are doing well this holiday season. I like that we have festivals of light all around the world. Independent of cultures, there's very many festivals of light this dark time of year.
Yeah, and the feasting too. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
we've made it to this spot. We're really depressed. Let's get together, eat some food, drink something that makes us feel a little
Celebrate our
rosy, and
harvest
then
because it's about to get cold and dreary for a long
yeah,
time. But yeah, and then we dress everything up with light and cheer and joy, and then we have these festivals to kind of brighten our mood in the midst of it, of sharing and giving thanks, giving gifts. So yeah,
I want my
happy
sunlight
holidays.
back.
What's that?
The holiday season's nice and all, but I want my sunlight back.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sun was nice today. It came out around here, around our way, here in the mountains
The blizzard's
of
coming now.
Appalachia.
This weekend's supposed to be brutal.
Is it?
Yeah.
See, I haven't been. I just saw something,
Uh,
a notification, and from the weather app. Yeah, I guess it's coming then. What are we looking at?
a unique, very large kind of blizzard cell. Like this year was a double La Nina year. So when those tend to happen, we get funky weather throughout the whole cycle. The sun's doing funny stuff. Our magnetosphere is doing funny stuff. The ocean currents are doing some funny stuff. You know, we're doing some funny stuff. So it's
This is what happens.
hey, it's been a while since we got a really good blizzard, man. Like I remember when I was a kid, it's like what was it? There was one in like 94, 95, and then one in like 97, 98. And
Yes.
that was like, like 4 feet of snow.
I
It
remember
was
the 90, I
awesome.
think
The
the
four,
94 one, that was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were out of school for like a month.
yeah, that was the year that I think that was the year that I
It
got
was
my
insane. It was like a few
inoculations
few weeks.
as a kid. So and they had
Oh,
to stick
really?
me in both legs and both arms because I was squirming too much.
Fun.
So I was sore in all of them. And me and my sister were walking down the street in the snow in our overly puffy get-ups, looking like penguins because we're just stiff, like stiff and fluffy. Man.
That's cute.
But that was the year my dad he like carved like a bust of the Mother Mary and Jesus, or not a bust, a relief of Mary and Jesus, and then like
Whoa.
made a parking garage for our cars. We lived in a townhouse at the time, so it was like two slots with like cut snow bricks, and then he carved those little dog dragon things that are outside of like Chinese temples and palaces and stuff. He carved a bunch of those going up the stairs to the townhouse. Which
Oh,
was pretty
wow,
cool.
man.
I think he made the
Good fun
newspaper
with it.
that year too with his snow carvings. Oh man, and that was the year where we had an engineer neighbor that converted his backyard, which are those long narrow backyards, into like a tube slalom course that went back and forth and back
Fun.
and forth. And then I lived on like, it wasn't really a cul-de-sac. It was just like a dead end street that went into the park. But all the snow got piled up like 10 feet high. So we had an awesome starting point to slide down the street and see how far you could get.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, that was fun. I remember bobsledding through the neighborhood
Good
during one of the big ice storms.
yeah.
Yeah, waxing up the blades, starting in the high part of the neighborhood. And I remember it was so frozen, it was like several inches thick that we were just going up and down people's yards,
Yeah.
down the street, and it was going on for blocks. We got to the high point of the neighborhood, and then we would race all the way down.
I remember my first time with like super high speed sledding. It was probably like 99 or 2000 when we got like serious ice. And I got one of those, radio flyer sleds, with the hard rails on them, and you could flex them to change direction. You're supposed to sit on them, right?
Yeah.
And use your feet, but
No, but we would
lay down on your belly,
things, yeah.
and the roads were nothing but like solid ice, and I got to the point where I realized how dangerous these things were, because I was going like 35 miles an hour down this hill at this place Claymont out in the woods, and it was long enough, and I was like going to the point where like I knew if I bailed I was gonna be hurt bad, like like ridiculous bad. So
big time, man. I hit a mailbox. The only thing that saved me from hitting that 4x4 post of the mailbox was my pants getting caught on the bottom end of the bobsled.
Oh yeah, right.
I had these big giant Jinkos on too. I was so upset about my Jinkos.
God, the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, that was pretty good. We used to do things that we could get really hurt. I remember
we
being
used to
a kid
eat the
making
mutated fish out of the local creek.
Yeah,
go
right.
fishing there.
Get the weird looking crawfish.
Storm drainage water.
You're like, look at this, it's great. When I lived in Amber Meadows in Frederick, Maryland, we were right across the street from Fort Detrick, which is like one of the main, military bio facilities. And the creek that we played in, that we catch crawfish out of, that we messed around and ran right underneath Fort Detrick. And
oh no, man.
Fort Detrick's got some spotty history when it comes to like weird chemicals getting into the ground. Like that, there's a myth that exercise running track on that bit of land is actually like severely contaminated dirt, so they don't want to put anything on top of it except just the asphalt running track and call it a park.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I cannot confirm or deny. I don't know, but that was the rumor. Yeah, and we had some funky looking crayfish in there. They would get like that freaking big, and like one huge claw and then a little claw. And I know those are like the males, or it's a sex specific thing. But then you'd see ones with like nubs of what looks like it was trying to be another claw off of it, or weird colors, or it was.
Don't eat the three-eyed fish.
Yeah, right. Well, isn't there? Oh no, that's a lizard. Never mind. The three-eyed lizard that has its third eye still kind of there, and it can sense, like if a shadow goes over top of its head, it can tell.
Interesting.
Yeah, the three-eyed lizard. Look it up. It's pretty cool.
So we're back to it now, man.
Yes.
We're on to episode 11
Episode 11.
Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This part is going to be interesting. We get into higher states of consciousness. This is part one of a two-part series or lecture, I guess, on this subject. So this is going to be super ultra intriguing. We just came from an episode on consciousness. And in fact, we just did our reflection series covering the first 10 episodes of this series. So yeah, we're excited to be able to get back into it now.
Yes.
So yeah, join us. Let's go ahead and switch on over here and begin.
We got
sound. Hold on a second.
Hold on, press pause. Let's make sure it's not on mute.
Turn it up on our side. It's just quiet. Here we are.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Last time we were discussing the axial age within ancient India, and we were focusing in on the pivotal figure of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and we had been talking about his particular story. We talked about the two modes of being that were being represented in his story of leaving the palace, the having mode and the being mode. And we talked about modal confusion and about overcoming it. We followed him to where he's sitting under the Bodhi tree, and he achieves a deep kind of realization, a deep state of enlightenment. Along the way, we had discussed what mindfulness is, how mindfulness operates through attentional scaling, and how it can increase your cognitive flexibility, your capacity for insight. And then we were trying to draw this all together with some cognitive science, a discussion of what is it to experience enlightenment. Now, I'm not offering right now a complete account or anything like a comprehensive theory of enlightenment. We're going to be slowly working towards that as we move through this lecture series. But I do want to get into and continue the discussion of these higher states of consciousness. So if you remember, they're very problematic, but that they're at the core of many of the axial age world religions and foundational philosophies. This is the idea that people have an alternative state of consciousness that they regard as somehow more real than their everyday state of consciousness. And that's problematic precisely because we tend to judge realness by how well we get an overall coherence in our intelligibility, how we're making sense of things. But in these altered states that are very different from our everyday consciousness and therefore do not cohere with it, people do the alternative. Instead of rejecting it the way we reject dreaming, for example, because it doesn't cohere with our everyday experience, people reject the everyday experience as illusory, and they say that this state of consciousness somehow gives them an improved access to reality. And as you remember, as we've been going through the axial age revolution and the sense of wisdom and meaning that is attendant upon it, this ability to transcend through illusion and get connected to what is more real is central to what wisdom means, and having some deep sense of connectedness to reality is also central to what it is to regard one's life as authentically meaningful in some fashion. So that was the problem we had set up, the problem of higher states of consciousness. Now I want to start by talking about what it's like to give a theory. We talked about this also last time. We want a theory that's both descriptively adequate and prescriptively adequate. A descriptive theory should tell me, like, give me a good explanation for why these higher states of consciousness have the experiential feel that they have, why they're able to produce these deep kinds of transformations. Because if you remember, what typically happens is because people have sensed this deep connectedness to reality, and because being connected to reality is one of fundamental ways in which we make our lives meaningful, people will radically transform their whole lives, their sense of self, their interpersonal relationship, in order to maintain and enhance that connectedness to this deepened reality. So we need to give a descriptively adequate explanation, and this has to work at multiple levels, and this is where cognitive science is so important because of the way it tries to bridge between these various levels and disciplines. We need to give an account of the psychological processes, of the information processes, and ultimately the brain processes that are at work. Then we need a prescriptively adequate theory of higher states of consciousness. We need an account that explains why it might be considered rationally justifiable that these states authorize and legitimate such transformations. Can we see why these states should be listened to when they claim to give us access to a deeper reality? Now, in order to carry out the first one, seeing what the Siddhartha was going through, right, when he's achieving this higher state of consciousness, this awakened state, and if you remember last time we talked about how comprehensively extended this is, not only qualitatively through the world religions, but just quantitatively through the population. That 30 to 40% of people report these awakening experiences and the resulting deep transformation. So in order to get through that, let's talk about what does it feel like to be in such a state. And because we have these surveys and we have the work of Newberg and Taylor, and we have lots of first-person accounts, we can draw some general pictures of what's going on. So there's three components we want to look at. We want to look at how is the world being experienced? How is the self being experienced? And how is the relationship between the world and the self being experienced? So let's start on the world side. So people report the following things. They report a tremendous sense of clarity. And this is both perceptual and cognitive. So the world seems extremely clear to them and makes sense to them in a way that it hasn't before. The perceptual part of that clarity is often experienced as bright. Things are shining. And that's the original meaning of glory, for example. To go back to the Bible, for example, the term that is most often used to describe God is glory, which is not a moral term. It's a term about how sort of shining God is, how bright it is. Now, you remember, that's a feature that people also reliably report in the flow experience, that everything seems very vivid and bright and intense. Now, what's interesting is that while people describe this clarity, and notice how this is going to pick up on what we talked about when we talked about mindfulness. They talk about both an expansion of vision, so it's very comprehensive. They get almost like they're somehow aware of the whole of the world, but they also are aware of finite details. So this is captured, for example, in Blake's famous poem, right? To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and to spend eternity in an hour. So you get this deep interpenetration of sort of everything and the finite details. You can see that, so what you're getting is this massive expansion of that attentional scaling that we talked about mindfulness enhancing, and thereby enhancing our capacity to break frame and make frame and get fundamental insight. And pay attention to the word insight, seeing into reality. So, overall, there's an increased sense of making sense of things, right? Making sense of things. So the world is both intricate and interesting in this extended and enhanced and shining way. So almost universally, people describe this experience as the world is beautiful. It's deeply beautiful to them. And we'll come back at some point to talk about the connections between beauty and truth. Particularly the work of Skari about this. The world is very alive. It seems very alive during these experiences because it's so pregnant with energy and significance. And all of this comprehensiveness, but intricate detail, the shining, the beauty, the making sense, all of this comes together in the notion of oneness. There is somehow an underlying oneness to everything. There's deep and profound integration, which of course makes sense given that very often when we are explaining something, we are finding what unifies and integrates them together. What's happening on the side of the self? What's happening on the side of the self is people report a profound sense of peace. And this is not peace in an empty, just lack of conflict. It's very similar to what we talked about in Plato. And you're probably seeing Plato's ideas about anagoge resonating with this. I hope you're seeing that. But remember in Plato, right, that inner state of peace is one of inner harmony, when all of the various components of your personality and your cognition are mutually optimally working together in concert. And this is the kind what people report. They often report that this is the greatest sense of peace they've ever experienced in their life. And if you remember in Plato, this sense of peace, right, is connected to and resonates with this enhanced sense of connectedness to reality. And interestingly enough, that's what we're seeing in these descriptions. People also describe experiencing profound joy. Now, of course, we've lost the sense of what this word means. We've lost it precisely in words like enjoyment, where enjoyment means having fun or pleasure. But joy is not the experience of fun or pleasure. Joy is the positive emotion you have when you experience a deep connection to what is good. So joy is the experience you have of this is really, really good. Okay? Interestingly, people often report a fundamental change in their sense of self, and we're going to come back to this. They report two things. They'll often report that their normal sense of self has disappeared, their egocentric, autobiographical sense of self has disappeared, and if you remember, that's continuous with what we saw when people are in the flow state. They report that self-consciousness, that autobiographical narrative self is disappearing. They often also report remembering in the sense we talked about when we talked about sati and remembering the being mode. They remember, they say, I remember my true self. I remember who I really am. So there's a profound connection inward to the core machinery of the self that is at one with a profound sense of connecting to the underlying pattern that governs and makes intelligible reality. People report that in this state they have a tremendous sense of energy and vitality, again analogous to the flow state. And finally, they report that they often use this term, there's a tremendous sense of insight and understanding. Again, continuous with the flow state. Now what about the relation? So this is deep connection, profound connectedness, deep at one-ment, again like the flow state. But even more, people feel so at one that they start to feel that they're participating in their reality that they're connected to. They start to feel like they're sharing identity to it. And this way of thinking about this is when we talked about Aristotle's notion of the conformity theory of knowing. They feel so deeply conformed to this underlying reality from the very core of their being that they are experiencing an identification with it. But this participatory knowing is so superlative, and it's so profound and so transformative that inevitably people just say that the experience, that this connection is ineffable. And we noted this last time we were talking about. How is it that these experiences that have no articulable, declarative content, because they're ineffable, you can't put them into words, you can't put them into propositional thought, nevertheless are considered so loaded with, so capable of bearing the signature of ultimate reality or realness for people.
Break.
Right.
Internet's running a little bit slow, so it was kind of wonky, like getting it to begin there for you guys. I hope you caught everything. He was just reviewing
It gets a
the
little
previous
weird
episode to set us up. Of
when
course,
the temperatures change.
it's the cold. It's the cold air. That's what it is.
That messes with the connectors and all that stuff, and they expand and contract, and it gets funny.
Yeah. So far, anybody tuning in, I'm sure you can see we're about to get into some really intriguing subject matter. So we're going to come up with a descriptively adequate explanation and a functionally adequate explanation of the state of enlightenment, of higher states of consciousness that makes sense for cognitive science, from the psychological perspective to the actual understanding of the physiology and what is happening.
Yeah. So what he
And why is this helpful and useful to human beings, of course, as well?
Yeah, so a descriptive and prescriptive.
Prescriptive, thank you, yes. I was looking for that. Yeah, so
Um,
why is this so relevant? Why does this give us such a deeper sense of reality?
Yeah, so the descriptively adequate explanation has to work on multiple levels. This is where cognitive science, so the cognitive science end is the describing of what's actually
Happening
happening.
physiologically
And
in the
then
brain.
the prescriptive is like why. Like
Why? Yes.
why is this
Deep connectedness,
Yeah,
this
why-
transformation happening for
Mhm.
human beings.
yeah.
Yes. Then that's awesome. That's actually going to help us understand and be able to understand one another and bridge our science and spiritual traditions once again.
Mm-hmm.
I thank God for John Vervaeke helping legitimate the states of self-transcendence, of enlightenment, of self-realization,
Yeah, and he
however we term them. The 30 to 40% of
that
people
would be
seem
the
to have had experiences that are in this territory.
Yeah, and that he mentioned the word quantitative. So the qualitative
And
end of it
quantitative,
would be qualitative would be like all the religions in the world are all trying to do this,
Mhm.
have this
Mhm.
quality, and then 30 to 40% of people have this experience. So that's the quantity of people having this experience. And like ultimately the goal would be, we need to get them numbers up. Those are rookie numbers. We need to, get up to 60,
right.
70, 80, 90, 100% of us,
Yeah, well, we're functioning optimally. We're much more widely considerate. We're able to come to conciliation, compromise much more easily, and we're actually able to tackle very complex, challenging problems that face us as a species together in a prescriptive manner. Proscriptive, prescriptive.
I think it's prescribe.
Right, yes.
Not proscribe, but prescribe.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's a difference between the two.
I think
there might be a proscribe and a
pre is
prescribe.
before and pro is for.
It's the doing up. So we're going to come up with a descriptively adequate explanation of this, or description of this, and let's get into a little bit like what is this higher state of consciousness? How it gives us a sense of deep communion with everything and everyone around us. We feel a sense of timelessness. So all of this is synonymous with the flow state as well. What people report when they're in that flow state.
And he breaks it down into three parts, which are I find beneficial for understanding this. There's the world. So the world is more the bright, the glorious, the shining,
Yes.
The world in a grain of sand. Actually, I want to look up that because hold on real quick. Here we go. 704. Let's see.
To see the world in a grain of sand.
To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower and hold infinity in the palm of your hand and to spend eternity in an hour. That's the non-dual state.
Who's the poet that wrote that again?
Blake.
That was Blake.
Yeah, and whoever put up the transcript or got that going, it's great. Makes taking notes a lot easier for me.
Thank you for whoever is helping John manage his YouTube now, because you guys are doing a great job.
But that poem is kind of I could say the non-dual state, but really pointing to
the outer and inner aspect of this.
The scaling up and the scaling down at the same time, being able to see everything within the smallest thing and see the smallest thing within everything else.
That deep interpenetration, as he called it. There's an expansion of vision. There's also penetration into finite details. You're gaining insight, a sense of profundity and meaning to what's happening. Everything is imbued with meaning and epiphany.
Yeah.
And so there's this beauty, there's this truth, there's this aliveness to everything.
I like that word, the alive, because that definitely, from my experiences, it feels alive. That's the only way you can really explain the feeling. Like the world feels alive. You feel the aliveness of the world. And all the little critters and plants
and
within
the interconnectedness of it all. So you get this sense of underlying oneness. And this is what helps you unify us as people and with our environments, and it helps us understand the
integrates
integration.
us. Yeah.
It integrates us. Yeah. And so this helps lead to a more peaceful level of coexistence, a higher level of coexistence. Yeah. And it's the human being's most optimally tuned state of being.
Yeah. And then he mentions the what people I guess the people being interviewed, but what people are saying about the sense of self. And he brings up the word peace, but not necessarily like peace and joy, not necessarily like we think of peace and joy, but
and it's in the peace
like
that
inner
understands
harmony
inner
is the
harmony,
word he used.
that understands the interconnectedness, that you feel in concert with everything, and that deep peace comes from a deep level of immediate understanding too, because everything is true before you. Nothing's hiding behind filters of perception. Everything's just super apparent, and so you feel the enhanced connectedness, the inner harmony, the being in concert with
the joy. And what is joy? Joy is good.
Joy
That's
is what
how
is
I have
good.
it written as like joy.
Joy is what is good. Yeah, it's not just like pleasure or fun at all.
But
it's actually when you come into contact with something that is truly healing. That is just, it feels true, it feels good, and it is beautiful. And so joy is like, seeing your baby for the first time, or your breath being taken away by something beautiful. in in a sunset
Well,
or a mountain.
we get choked up with people like rescuing cute kittens and puppies and doing kind things for people in need and stuff.
It's
You
the
know,
end
it
of
is
Shawshank
good.
Redemption
You feel that
when Red's talking about
right.
hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we lose so we have the ego death moment, which is like the death of that. What do you say? Eccentric autobiographical.
Yeah, that
sense that we have.
that ongoing inner monologue.
That's telling you your life.
Psychological
Yeah.
sense of self
Yeah.
that we have, what we call the ego. Not ego as in I think I'm so much bigger or better kind of ego, but actually just the ego that everyone has, like the false sense of self. We think we are
the
our
barrier between
personality,
things,
but we have a personality. You are not your personality. You actually act through the personality.
Yes.
So who is you? Who are you? That's the great question. And that's the invitation of self inquiry and meditation, is to look in. Who is it that has the sense of self? If the sense of self is all these kinds of descriptions and features that we can come up with, and stories, and our experience, our conditioning, how we feel and how we think, well, who is it that is feeling? Who is it that is thinking? Because there's an awareness that sees all thoughts, feelings, sensations as they come in. And that is completely open and spacious. And it's peaceful. And so you connect with that, and you connect with a sense of interconnectedness with the world, and it's more apparent. Everything is super salient. It feels more real than regular existence.
And there's
just like this feels realer than a dream.
And there's a remembering, the sati end of
and
remembering, and
it's
like,
this is waking
up.
So you wake up from a dream to normal level of consciousness, and then you wake up from normal level of consciousness into the true actuality of, I don't know, of the cosmos, of existence, of what we actually truly are, which is endless.
Vervaeke says here, let's see, remembering the being mode. They say, I remember my true self. I remember who I really am.
Who I really am.
So there's a profound connection inward to the core machinery of the self that is at one with a profound sense of connection to the underlying patterns that govern and makes
make intelligible.
And thank you.
The underlying patterns of reality.
Yes. And these are things that people reliably report. Not like they're all getting together and telling each other of.
No, this is
the feeling. Oh,
this is the thing. You see it in all the world religions, all the ancient wisdoms, traditions, people that have experienced higher states of consciousness, near-death experiences, positive psychedelic trips. I'll come back talking about this shared sense of identity with everything and everyone, the sense of oneness, the sense of the inner joy, the sense of truth, the sense of waking up for the first time, and like I feel like I'm totally awake for the first time in my life, like that the brain is on 100%, your spirit feels interconnected with everything around it, and you understand in a deeper level why and how everything actually is in an ineffable way, in an indescribable way.
Yeah, and that's the relationship change that they feel, the relationship with, not just with themselves, but with the world. It actually both, yourself and your world.
Yes, yes. And so this sati, this remembering of what we truly are, this waking up, this is our actual I. This is how I came up with the idea for the name of this podcast, for us to share in this ongoing awakening into what we truly are. Will never be done. There's no cap to enlightenment, so we're on this ever-growing, blossoming journey together. But yeah, I think so. That catches us up so far. You guys ready to dive back in?
Just real quick.
What do you got?
It's hard to read these off.
If you guys have thoughts or questions, feel free to chime in, and we'll get to you guys. If not during this episode, next episode.
People feeling that they're participating in their reality, that they're connected to this, they start to feel like they're sharing identity to it.
Yes.
And your way of thinking about this is when we talked about Aristotle's. But so the sharing identity with this experience too. And the ineffable, like how do you describe this?
You can't put it into words.
It's not like, oh yeah, I was told this and I can write them down into verses. It's like I struggling to even.
It's beyond words. Yeah, but it's what words come from. It's like the source of all creation. Becoming one with that, and sensing that deeply
Well, you
in a
remember,
way that's like, oh my gosh, I remember, like in a way that you're remembering from before you were born almost. It's like that.
remember Nelson's Ledges Quarries?
Yeah.
And we're sitting on the beach and we had like a 15, 20-minute long conversation of, you know? Yeah, I know. Like, really, I know. Oh, yeah, you know? I know. and sure enough, we knew. Like, it was like, yeah, and, you know, look around. Like,
There was a
I
couple
know.
epic realizations that happened while we were walking, I think, that led up to that moment where we're just kneeling there on the sand.
Yeah, and I was
it
burying
was just-
myself
yeah.
up to my eyeballs to catch the whole sky.
It was absolutely
Ugh.
what John will say later on in this episode.
Oh, man.
It's
Yeah.
like that flow state, that cascade of insights,
Yeah.
insights and epiphanies that pile upon epiphanies. How beautiful that there's this depthless wisdom to be found, and it's like inherent in everything and everyone around us, and it's accessible by anybody through psychotechnologies, through practices such as meditation,
Yeah, you know, you don't necessarily have to do it, you know, like
contemplation, dance, fasting.
chemically or meditationally or any of the, there's so many ways to
Mhm.
engender this state, this higher state of being, and you know that's what
You
like
can
a good
practice
a good
this-
religion
yes.
should do is to provide you with the
Yes,
circumstance
because ultimately
to,
we need to practice this together. You can only do
Yeah.
so much on your own,
Yeah.
and it needs to ripple out and become an interconnected part of human culture and our societies.
yeah, and we need to like it's almost like we're at the we're rebuilding our shaman base, if you will,
Mhm.
you know, because like we really got away from
Sure, yeah,
The-
we killed
you
off
know,
all
and
the old
yeah, and not
shamans.
just shamans, but also like traditions that would get us into these states and behaviors
Sure,
and now we're rebuilding, but we need responsible elders. So you know, in my mind, the John Vervaekes and you know all the people talking about these things, and you know that are at the forefront of like psychedelics research and all this other stuff. They're kind of like the first generation of the old masters that we have to rebuild. You know, and then
yes,
then we're going to have to pick up the torch and keep it going, because if we want it in our societies, we have to do it ourselves, and we have to do it in a way that actually works and replicates itself.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
a good society replicates itself
Yeah, we
reliably.
need to-
A good tradition replicates itself reliably.
We don't need to, but it would
I
be
think-
advantageous.
I don't know. I think it might be a
It'll
need.
benefit the experience.
I think it's a need at this point. We need the good. We need.
Well, yeah, if
rebuild
you
the
care
good
about the
wise.
long-term survival of humanity and the best aspects of our species and the furthering of a peaceful symbiotic coexistence with one another and life throughout the universe, then certainly this would be important.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that's about all for this section.
Cool. Let's jump back in, guys.
So we need a descriptive theory that can account for all of these features, the features of how the world is experienced, how the self is experienced, and the relation. Now, what I've been showing you already, of course, is deep continuity with the flow experience. I'm not claiming it's a flow experience, it's more than that, but I'm showing you that there's continuity, just like I showed you that there's continuity between the flow experience and the insight experience. And that's why when people are having these higher states of consciousness, they are also proposing a very profound insight. And notice how often when you have an insight, it's also ineffable to you. You don't know how the insight arose or how it came to be. You just like, I just see it. Now, some other important things we should know about these states. These states are often preceded by disruptive strategies. Disruptive strategies. These are strategies that are designed to disrupt your normal cognitive functioning and to alter your state of consciousness. So they can range from very long-term strategies to very short-term strategies. Long-term strategies can be the ones we've already described, like Siddhartha. Siddhartha was engaged for 6 years in these practices, these mindfulness practices of meditation and contemplation, and they bring about a very long-term, incremental, but nevertheless also profound disruption in your normal state of consciousness and cognition. People also can pursue very short-term disruptive strategies. These include things like fasting, sexual and sleep deprivation. If you remember, we talked about how shamans will make use of these strategies in order to induce the shamanic state. They will expose themselves to drumming, chanting. All of these things disrupt your normal level of cognition. And of course, when we talked about this as well, people will make use of psychedelics precisely because of the way they are so deeply disruptive of your normal cognition and your normal state of consciousness. So, what we know is that combinations, well, sorry, that's a little too strong. What we have some initial good evidence is that combinations of these strategies can be very good. There was a recent experiment coming out of the Griffiths lab in 2018 in which people who were practicing mindfulness and then took psychedelics tended to have a more enhanced experience than people who were just taking the psychedelics, for example. So you can combine the strategies together. They can be mutually supportive. Now, what's important for this, as we'll come back and take a look at more carefully in a few minutes, is disruptive strategies are also central to setting up insight. And that should make sense to you, given what we've talked about. You have to do a lot of breaking a frame before you can open up the possibility of making an entirely new frame. There was a recent experiment run by Yaden and al. In 2017. They had 701 participants. 69% of them reported this, what I called ontonormativity, this sense of the enhanced realness of their higher states of consciousness. And this was actually predictive of significant improvement across many dimensions of their life. Right? There was significant improvement in family life, health, sense of purpose, spirituality, and a release from the anxiety and fear of death. So the claim that these states do guide transformation has received empirical backing. Now, Yaden also brings out something important in that study that you don't see very well articulated in Newberg and in Taylor. And this is one of the disruptive strategies that that people are often using, and it bleeds into the phenomenology. By that I mean the experiential feel and structure of these experiences, right? And this is the notion of decentering. So when people describe these experiences, they shift from, right, a very sort of first-person orientation, an egocentric, to an allocentric. So they are not so egocentric. This is why this is called decentering. They're speaking more from like a third-person perspective and, right, allocentric. So let me just give you a quick understanding of the difference between these terms. I can describe my motion egocentrically, right? Things that are in front of me, behind me, to the right of me, to the left of me, right? And that, of course, varies by how I'm oriented because it is relative to me. But I can also describe my position allocentrically. I can say where I am relative to the North Pole, for example, right? So the first is a first-person egocentric way of moving through the world. The second is an allocentric third person. Now extend that out. People are much less egocentrically oriented when they're describing the experience of their state than they are normally. They're much more allocentrically oriented, and that makes sense given how intensified the experience of reality is to them. It's like the salience of reality is finally capable of eclipsing the narcissistic glow of our own ego. And for a moment, at least, or for several moments, we get release, right? And this is an important idea. Nirvana means to blow out, to extinguish, or the Vedanta term moksha is release. We get a release from, right, the imprisonment, the self-idealization by the supersalience, and therefore the bullshitting of our own egocentric perspective. I mean, do you not sometimes wish to be free from the prison cell of the supersalience of your own ego? So, as I've been suggesting to you, these higher states of consciousness have a lot of features of insight. I've already talked about the insight. Remember, we did the 9-dot problem, for example, those aha moments. Because you get, in that moment of insight, you get a flash of insight, you get sort of super salience, things are making sense to you, you get insight, it's almost visual into an underlying pattern, a unity, a oneness that wasn't there before. Your sense of what's relevant and important has been altered. And this ability to radically make sense, to find coherence, an underlying, intelligible, integrative pattern, this we now know from current work is directly predictive of the experience of meaning in life. So Samantha Heinzelman, whose work I recommend to you, I also got to meet Samantha in person and got to talk to her about this. But what she has is good experimental evidence of the following. If you give people a bunch of scenes that make sense to them, that they can sort of determine an underlying pattern to, and then ask them how meaningful their lives are, they will rate their lives as more meaningful. The act, do you understand? The act of making sense, of finding coherence, actually makes people experience their lives as more meaningful. They're not being shown profound pictures or deeply dramatic or narrative scenes or emotionally, they're just showing some very basic pictures, but the act of making sense, of finding coherence, elevates the sense of how meaningful their lives are. So, start to put this together. If you were to have an insight, that would give you an even more, sudden increase in your sense of meaning in life. And what if it's in flow? Well, it's going to be even more enhanced sense of meaning in life, and we already know that. The more often you have flow experiences, the more meaningful you find your life. And now what if it's beyond that? What if it's a higher state of consciousness that brings you this radical sense of deep intelligibility, not only of the world, but of yourself in both directions at the same time? Well, that is going to give you a profound sense of increased meaning in life. Now, if you try to put this together, if you get enhanced meaning in life coupled to an enhanced sense of understanding, and that actually does guide you in improving your life, that is going to build a tremendous amount of confidence in you that you have found a path towards self-transcendence and wisdom. We can start to understand some of the Buddha's confidence. Now, what do we know about these flashes of insight? Well, Tobolensky and Reber in 2010, this is a different Reber, not the implicit learning Reber, right, talk about how insight is a fluency spike. Although it's related to flow, it's not the same thing. Fluency is it's a general property of all of your cognitive processing. So how can we understand it? Well, initially people thought that fluency was a sense of how easy it was to process things. So the basic idea is, if I make it easier for you to process information, you will rate that information as better, more trustworthy, more believable, regardless of the actual semantic content. So for example, compare this, right, to this. The contrast isn't as great. And if I were to get you to read some text in black and the exact same text in the orange, you will rate what you read in the black as better, you'll have more confidence in it, more likely to be true. The semantic content is exactly equal. It's because it's easier for you to process the black and white contrast than the orange on white contrast. Now, it turns out it's not quite ease of processing, just because simply repeating a stimulus doesn't trigger this sense of fluency. It's more like how accessible information is, how applicable it is. I would argue that it's how well your system is zeroing in on, right, the relevant information. How much has the information be formatted for you so that you can zero in on relevant information. A way of thinking about this to help make sense of it is our discussion of psychotechnologies. Alphabetic literacy made your cognitive processing more fluent, and that improved your ability, your cognitive power, and by improving your cognitive power, that gives you an enhanced sense of how real and important the information you're processing is. So the idea here is when you are fluent, you are processing information very efficiently. When you have, according to Tobolensky and Reber, when you have an insight experience, what you're getting is a sudden spike in fluency. You're getting a significant increase in how fluently you're processing, and therefore you start to judge the information that you're processing therein as likely being more real. Now, is this an absolute perfect rule? No. But the fact that it's domain general, the fact that it seems to be part of our evolutionary heritage, and there's also some independent logical argumentation indicating that this fluency heuristic that your brain uses is actually a very good strategy. It's very generally the case, not perfectly, not certainty, but very generally the case that in real-world situations, if you are processing them very fluently, you are picking up on the real patterns. So insight is you're zeroing in. And then we talked about flow as an insight cascade, which is even more zeroing in. And it's coupled to implicit learning, in which you're picking up on bigger patterns that you're not consciously aware of. You can't put them into declarative utterances. Do you see what's happening here? So in the higher states of as you start to move towards the higher states of consciousness, like flow, you're getting this enhanced fluency. So your brain is working very optimally, and the implicit learning is picking up on very complex patterns, and you're tending to zero in on the causal ones rather than the correlational ones. I'm using all of this machinery we've already discussed because, as I've mentioned, in the flow state, you're starting to get a lot of the features of the mystical experiences, and ultimately those mystical experiences that can be transformative by enhancing meaning in life and your sense of connectedness to realness. You get at 1 minute in the flow state, the radical loss of self-consciousness. You're not egocentric. Although you know there's tremendous energy, it feels effortless to you. It's graceful. There's a super salience. It's intrinsically rewarding. It's like evolutionarily marked in. It's domain general and universal. All this stuff we've talked about. This is all being triggered in the higher states of consciousness.
We back.
All right, here we go.
Freaking awesomeness.
Yes.
Onto normativity. A little bit before that. Here we are. Continuity with flow and insight experiences. Okay, so we have these self-transcendent states where we have this sense of sharing, deeper sense of identity with the world, and a deeper insight into oneself. It's ineffable, and it's often preceded by disruptive strategies that disrupt our normal cognitive function, altered states of consciousness, long-term strategies for this, such as mindfulness, meditative, contemplative practices. They're shorter, so much shorter. Fasting, drumming, chanting, the use of psychedelics, plant medicines, and combinations of strategies such as prayer and fasting, such as psychedelics and prayer or meditation, work very, very well. They are actually mutually supporting one another. And so we have studies that actually now support this.
Yeah, that would be Aiden. In 2007, there was 701 participants. So 69% of 701 participants recorded this enhanced sense of realness in their higher stage of consciousness, and that this was actually predicted. And so having these experiences was predictive of what was his exact wording here, because I don't want to mess this up. Improvement across many dimensions of their life, whether their working life, their personal life, their health, their coming to terms with death.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So
Greatly decreased sense of fear of death.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, this would actually be an interesting study to check out. Let's see.
I think that was maybe Yang. Regardless, so we're getting some imperial backing for that combination of practices there. But anyways, we're looking at decentering techniques, which helps shift the egocentric to allocentric, which is when that sense of reality eclipses. So in the higher state of consciousness, the sense of reality actually eclipses, becomes the forefront of our sense of reality, and our ego, ongoing inner monologue side of ourselves, gets pushed to the background. And so we, instead of referring to oneself with that sense of I, it's more from like a third person perspective, like looking down on the map.
Yeah, like so the egocentric aspect would be like, the camera is in front of me, Chris is to the right of me, the ceiling is above me, and the allocentric self would be me and Chris are placed in the what is it? I guess it's southeastern corner of the sunroom.
Right.
So it's in relationship to the world in the sunroom where we're placed, opposed to the camera's in front of me, you're beside me. So we are in this corner of this room.
Yes.
So the allocentric would be like looking on a map, like you are here on the map, opposed to.
And this actually feels really good. There's like, they call it, there's like a word for this in like moksha, the sense of release, sati, remembering, awakening. The sense of reality is eclipsing that, as Vervaeke says, the narcissistic glow of one's own inner ego. So we gain increased clarity from bullshit because we're gaining supersalience. And this is a freedom from the supersalience of our own ego, seeing deeper into our sense of self and life. So we're finding more coherence and meaning as a result. That deep sense of interconnectedness helps us make sense, find coherence, find life to be more meaningful. And in the higher states of consciousness, beyond just the flow states, there's this radical sense of deep intelligibility, both of the world and of oneself at once. So this is a profound shift in people's lives that helps, and the sense of confidence that you see in characters like Christ or Buddha.
So I got a nice quote.
Actually
for this.
gives us an idea into how what it gives us as it guides us, because you're being guided by this interrelation, this depersonalized sense of integration with everything. It feels more like an ongoing flow with life as life.
So there's a quote that I made sure to timestamp. It's like the salience of reality is finally capable of eclipsing the narcissistic glow of our own ego.
There it
and
is.
For a moment at least, or for several moments, we get a release.
Yeah, moksha.
And the idea of nirvana.
Moksha.
And this is an important idea, nirvana. So that's what the band was talking about when they named themselves that. Well, for a really depressed band, they picked a very good feeling concept for a name.
Yeah, I think they just like the sound of it.
So to blow out.
An interview with Kurt where he's asked about it, and I don't think it was particularly like super deep, but it was at the same time there was something there in having that kind of name with the honesty and the edge of that music.
So what was that term? Moksha
or moksha?
Yeah, the blowing out to extinguish.
Yes, extinguishing of the ego and the lightness and the brightness of the world
It's interesting that
from that perspective.
he used the term blowing out, like blowing out.
Yeah.
Just
And it is very much like a letting go. It's an ungrasping. As you to gain a greater grip on reality, you let go. Because it's the sense of self hanging on that is basically using up all that extra processing in the mind, creating that sense of ego and this idea of this thing that's trying to keep alive. You free up that process, and suddenly you're processing more efficiently. So you get these fluency spikes. Insight is like a fluency spike. Improved intelligibility, when things stand out more bold, more salient to us, more apparent to us in our environments, then that helps us process more efficiently, thus improving our cognitive power, so we get an enhanced sense of realness. So these higher states are providing us more real, reliable insight into the actual matter of reality before us. It's zeroing in. It's a cascade, a flow-like cascade of insights, of picking up patterns. So this is increasing intelligibility. Thus, we're getting that implicit learning, that ineffable, unspeakable pattern recognition that happens within us, that we can learn, even though we can't put it into words very easily. But this helps us pick up more on the causal versus casual. I'm sorry, the causal versus
correlative.
Correlative. Thank you.
Or correlational.
Correlational.
I think it's probably correlative. I don't know. Words, man. So
yeah. So these are the mystical transformative experiences spoken of for ages by wise old dudes in mountains and in beautiful temples and wandering the desert and sometimes even behind the counter at a gas station. You never know. Buddhas are even at the gas pump sometimes. So I think that catches us up. Anything else you want?
Let me just
mark
2036. So Samantha Heinzelman, which he recommends the work. Let's see, following his sense and no, you think you pretty much covered it.
Okay.
Yeah,
rock and roll.
I think that's Belinsky and Reber and fluency.
Yes, that sense of fluency.
Actually,
what fluency actually
yeah,
means. It's defining of something more intelligible.
Thank
you for bringing that back. So that's what Vervaeke just did there, though, with all these terms that he's taught us now. He just taught us, he was able to put together a very deep, profound concept. What is actually happening cognitively in the brain.
So it's a general property of all your cognitive processing.
Yes.
Is
yeah, this is got to be the optimal human state. It makes perfect sense. You're in the state. You feel this sense of oneness, this interrelation. You're picking up on patterns better. This is access to deeper wisdom, understanding, ability to conform with reality and help positively impact.
Yeah, so it's an efficiency of processing.
Yes.
It's a little bit more than that, but we can think of it basically as that.
Super efficient. Oh, yeah. The brain is buzzing. Yeah, it's like everything is on, and it's effortless, too. That's what's beautiful about it. It's effortless.
Evolutionarily important, too, because the more fluent you are with sifting out the bullshit from what is real, the better off you can, eat and live and procreate.
It's just like when you tune an instrument. And you tune it such that it's now harmonized perfectly, then it's got the perfect amount of vibration. And our vital organs, our nervous system, everything is running optimally in this flow state. It works for everyone from pro athletes and Olympic athletes to jazz musicians and actors and creators. And all of us in our lives in moments where the flow state just comes upon us.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing to experience.
And it's so efficient of processing that you don't even realize you're doing it.
Yeah.
It's so efficient that it takes up no conscious effort.
Yes.
That's very efficient.
It's cool that the biology can be is built that way, that it can tune into an optimal state where it's doing the least amount of physiological and psychological damage to itself. In fact, it's in the optimal state for survival and for full enjoyment, like joy in the truest sense of feeling the sense of goodness that one gets when they're in a high state of congruence with reality. And how beautiful is it that the universe almost chimes like you solved a Zelda puzzle when you do this, because it's like, yes, welcome. It's just what you are. This is what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
We're this co-creative cosmos. That's all we know. That's what a beautiful, profound thing to get to experience.
And we're doing all this with, the term I think he used was exapted machinery or something along those lines. We're not really necessarily coming up with any new technologies or machineries, psychotechnologies or I don't know.
This is just how it feels for a self-aware psychotechnology creating level hominid life form.
It's almost like music,
Animals feel flow state, but they don't feel the. I don't know if they feel this level of self-transcendence where it as it occurs.
Well,
to
I don't
human
think they're
being,
necessarily trying to figure out like exactly why they're feeling that
No,
way.
yeah, they're
and
not feeling a
yeah.
release of moksha from their ego. They don't have a false sense of reality.
Yeah.
They just have reality and awareness. But they can certainly feel in a state of flow and act in those flow states and those optimal states.
And I'm sure to a certain degree, certain highly intelligent animals have their own psychotechnologies that they're developing slowly.
There certainly is self-awareness at levels of degrees that you see, and things like whales that sing and have songs that travel from different families of whales all around the world. Like,
I wonder how much awareness do you actually have to efficiently use psychotechnology or a psychotechnology, like like one psychotechnology being like
what seems then things like whales and dolphins to some degree, and the apes develop some kind of culture. It's definitely not as developed as ours, not even close.
Yeah, but
it's there.
I wonder, I'm doing the shaman thing and putting myself in the deer skin here and thinking about it, but it's like, how do herding animals, herding animals aren't just, genetic mass that's telling them what to do.
You can
but
see
it's
it
also,
like puppies and kittens learning from one another, even when it's a different, totally different species.
I think play is probably like the most primal psychotechnology. Play allows us to learn how to defend ourselves and also figure out our bodies in a way that's fun, that we develop as we learn to play.
Yes. Yeah, that makes us better adapted to our environment.
And, maybe the parents teach them how to play too, and, like how not to be an annoying little shit.
Yeah, right.
Quit tugging on my
ear. Be
ear.
socially acceptable. There's only so much I'm going to put up with.
I don't know. It's just a thought, a postulation, like bring yourself down to the animal level and work your way back up.
Right. Well, what do you want to do? You want to take a break now?
Let's take a quick break.
Jump back in.
Get some water or your favorite beverage. Go to the bathroom.
Have your smoke.
Yeah, I gotta go poke the fire. Got the wood stove going downstairs, so gotta take care of that. Forgot that we were halfway through. It's just so much fun. It flies by.
Yeah.
And hey, it's like 9 o'clock, so we're right at the halfway mark. We're getting good at, streamlining all this.
Yeah, hey, look
every
at us.
episode gets better and better and better. That's, every episode just a little bit better.
We're trying. As long as you guys end up watching this series, this John Vervaeke guy.
You really should.
I'm happy.
And then take it to your coffee shops and start discussing stuff like this.
Do that.
Got to take the culture back, man.
Good call. We got to. Well, we are the stewards. We get to guide this planet and one another, and we get to be that example we wish to see and all that good stuff. We can change the world from the inside out. That's the name of the game, just popularizing this invitation to self-inquiry, meditation, mindfulness practices, and the other psychotechnologies that allow us to engage in wisdom and fellowship together.
And you don't have to go out and create new ones. We got a whole toolbox filled with very useful tools.
And we've got to pick up on this game of perfecting our collective sense-making capacities.
Yeah, that's
'Cause we can
the
solve
trick.
great problems together.
Yeah, it was getting.
Yeah, we can build spaceships, we can build pyramids, we can make smartphones and these kinds of things when we put our minds together, and we can actually use that collective wisdom, that collective sense making for tackling the greatest challenges that face our species and to healing all of this stupid social breakdown that we see going on. I'm sure everybody's starting to get tired of it.
It is tedious and
Yeah.
plodding and
It's getting
irritating.
old. It's old. We are
doom,
so
doom.
easily pit against one another. Divide and conquer methodology is alive and well.
Well, you know,
But we're starting to pick up on it. People are starting to see it. Left and right, center, the reasonable people, the
yes, as
non-radical fundamentalist
has-
extremist of the too far right or too far left.
or just the too far, man.
Like, it's okay to
just
have
too
a
far, dude.
disposition. It's okay to lean one or another way.
I don't know. You could probably go too far center.
But we need each other.
Yeah.
The left and the right need one another.
Well, your brain has two hemispheres. Come on
for
now.
liberty, for liberalism, for the ideal of freedom and collective self-governance to prevail,
Yeah.
rather than authoritarian dictatorship
Yeah.
ruled by overpowered authoritative systems that utilize force of violence and manipulation to control. Rather than that, why not we self-educate and learn together and develop our sense-making capacities so that we can supersede, so that we can create the new systems that make this existing system obsolete. And we build the scaffolding even as the traditional civilizations are starting to fail and crumble, by bringing together the tried and the true, letting it be our glue and our foundation, and finding what is going to work best for one and all together as we develop new systems, 2.0 systems of what we got right now. We got to get it together.
Yep.
The people are going to have to do this ourselves because the traditional structures of authority are failing. They are corrupted.
Well, and this is the
It's clear.
This is the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius is the
Egalitarian times.
Yeah, and it's not, I know the story is, the sky story is a man bearing water, which is traditionally the female thing to do. But so what we're going through is an agendered or sexed thing of egalitarian. It's everybody coming into their own sense-making self and being able to make decisions for themselves and be able to participate fully.
Yeah, it's all of us tuning into
that's
a higher capacity
It's a personal
to care
thing.
for.
It's not about like tearing down rich people or bringing up the poor. It's personally getting people to be able to be full participants in their life, in the world, by making reasoning and sense making. It's like, it's no wonder like the independent information network has arisen the way it has. Like your podcasters and your like your Substackers and your like all variations of this are becoming such a big thing. We're realizing we have to decentralize and bring
Spread the seeds.
Yeah, because you can't just bring people down. That doesn't work. You can't just bring people up because
you
you
need
can't
actual
just bring
ethically
everybody.
guided journalism. Once again, that
But
is
it's
trying as objectively as it can to just tell what
individuals
happened,
doing it
rather than presenting a framing. And it's broken down more to individuals and small groups doing this from the ground up. It's very grassroots.
So that's a reflection of what we're
reweaving.
striving for individually as well. We're consuming these things, I think ultimately because we feel a deep need for this personal individual responsibility thing. Gone are the days where we can just have somebody else do it, and we know it, we feel it.
It's true.
It's a call
we've gotten to live through something of a golden age as we became so technologically efficient, and then the greedy among us took control of that.
And the lazy allowed themselves to be taken control of.
We could have been technologically advancing while maintaining the stability and symbiosis with planet and one another. And
we're doing
our governments have certainly been infiltrated by financial power centers, corporate.
Well,
and
and let's just say like cultists that have an ideology that
dark,
didn't work the last 100 years. So why are we doing it again on a global level?
No doubt.
And I don't mean cultists in like hoodoo and all, and, all this other stuff. I mean, people who believe in what they call an economic or governance system, but is more of like a theology that are then trying to apply it to the world. Like, look at what
Yeah,
the
does
UN
notice how
and
we're getting
UNESCO is up to right now. They got
super egocentric at the same time that we've been having this mindfulness revolution for the last few decades here. So we're just kind of having a lash back. It's the turbulence of the waves, and it's the swinging of the pendulum, and it's just happening faster and faster and faster now, as we can be easily fooled by our baser instincts and driven by fear and manipulation of our emotions.
Yeah, they get you
that
with the
that
fear,
will get
man.
us, and then people will recognize. Like collectively, people start to recognize the bullshit.
Yes.
And
well, I was talking
like Epstein didn't kill himself, kind of.
Well, I was
we
talking
just
with
figure it out together sometimes, and so that a lot of that's happening right now at faster and faster rates, even as more bombs are being thrown into the mix to try and throw more chaos.
Well, it's hard to take over the coffee shop if you're an external force. So what we were talking about before the podcast was, people like if they're shakers and movers and they have the money to invest, buy property, open like coffee shops and bars where you're allowed to talk about philosophy, politics, and religion. You just have a be polite about it.
And start bringing that culture to your own coffee shop, too. Invite a bunch of friends. Start having, like, coffee shop parties.
Yeah, and you just talk about things that we're not
more
supposed to talk about in public anymore. It's like, go ahead and talk. Like, because we're not even, when I go to the bar and talk with people, I'm not good at the small talk. I go deep, and people are like, "Oh, too
that's
deep
the
for
stuff
me."
That
and
we're supposed to be talking
I'm like, dude,
about.
that's the best stuff.
Where's the adults
like,
trying to engage and help run the world together? Because it's going to take all of us together now to sail this ship. Because we're globally interconnected. Where all of our cultures are starting to mix, and they have indeed also been clashing, and we're all reeling from the impact of so many different ways of looking at the world. But we're also finding these golden threads that run through all of the great wisdom schools. And why not bring that ancient wisdom and those psychotechnologies to bear now and start to practice them together and see how they inform one another, pick up where each other leave off, and complement one another. I mean, just seeing things, the same thing from different angles. Yeah. Since there are so many paths to the mountaintop.
More eyes are better when looking for something. And when you're looking for something that it can't be defined, that's ineffable, you need more and more eyes. So when you say, then they go, yes, I know.
Yes.
And more of us, let's get those numbers from, what was it? 30 to 40% of people having these higher states of consciousness. Let's get those numbers up in every way we can.
Bring this to ritualistic level as part of our holidays.
I get it. Some people don't want to sit there and meditate. Some people aren't cool with taking chemical,
or plant medicines,
or plant medicines or things like that. Some people really
prefer
don't like
breathing practice. The long-term mindfulness practices,
we have
which
so
are
many
also
now.
just so good to have throughout your life, regardless of what else you're doing.
Yeah, and everybody is a little bit different, but there are so many different methods in order to get into these states.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's best to try multiple things out and see what marry well together for you. Yeah. Because that is literally what humanity and our cultures are doing right now as well. And Buddhism and Christianity have long had a beautiful relationship amongst their mystics. Yeah. And that should be able to continue throughout the world. Yeah. So we're here to help encourage that. We're going to take a quick break, guys. So go ahead, do what you got to do, and we'll be right back.
And we're back.
And we are back. What up, what up, what up? Howdy ho, everybody. So we just talked about that high-speed implicit learning cascade of insights that's going on in the mind during these higher states of consciousness that give us that sense of deep coherence and thus meaning in life. The capacity to pick up on patterns increasingly reliably, improved efficiency, optimized status of the brain during these events.
And it helps in all aspects of life.
Insights both into the flow or sense of oneself as well as the outer world. Yes. Yes, indeed. So here we are going to dive back into it now. and we froze John.
This is a great
On
face.
this
I think everybody
hilarious-
should see it. This is a master doing his work. Face of a master.
This is the face of a master right here. It's just in this moment. Yeah, all right, here we go.
Feel the intensity.
Let's jump back into it here.
Intrinsically rewarding. It's like evolutionarily marked in. It's domain, general, and universal. All this stuff we've talked about. This is all being triggered in the higher states of consciousness. Okay, so this leads to a hypothesis I want to present to you. Oh, here it is. So this hypothesis is a continuity hypothesis. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? We are doing this because we want a scientifically legitimate, scientifically plausible explanation of what's going on when somebody claims enlightenment, like Siddhartha Gautama. When somebody claims radical self-transcendence, like Plato. Because we want something that gives a good explanation for what's actually happening and a good justification for why somebody should follow and be guided by these transformative experiences. Okay, so what's the continuity hypothesis? The continuity hypothesis is the idea, so this is a hypothesis I'm giving you, although as I was doing research on this, Newberg, independently from me, we haven't spoken, has also come up with a version of the continuity hypothesis. It's not as developed as the one I'm going to give you, but it's completely consonant with it. So the idea is fluency gets enhanced in insight, insight gets enhanced in flow, right? So you've seen all those arguments already. And then the idea is, as I'm trying to show you, flow experiences can be enhanced into mystical experiences. And then there are mystical experiences that can bring about a transformative experience. These are the higher states of consciousness in which people, right, are willing to transform. We'll come back to the problem of transformative experience. So the continuity hypothesis is basically the same machinery is being used, but it is being exapted. Remember exaptation? It is being progressively exapted into more and more powerful processing that can afford, what I'm going to argue, a rationally justifiable guidance into the kinds of transformation that we are seeking when we are seeking to cultivate wisdom and enhance meaning in life. When we are seeking to awaken from the meaning crisis, we are trying to invoke one of these awakening experiences. And remember, that's what Buddha means, the awakened one. So, Newberg argues that if you have a lot of these kinds of experiences, what he calls little enlightenment experiences, or regular insights, that this will eventually produce these kinds of experiences. And so this is not only a continuity hypothesis, this is a priming hypothesis, and I support that as well. The more you are practicing mindfulness, which we know is predictive of insight and flow, we know that mindfulness practices are predictive of mystical experiences, we know that they're connected to transformative experiences, the more you can prime this pump, the more you will be able to bring about this enhanced connectedness, this enhanced anagoge. All right, so this, I think, idea of the continuity hypothesis will help us to begin to explain what's going on in the higher states of consciousness and eventually use the very same machinery that we talk about in explaining it to justify it, to give a rational justification for it. All right, so we know, for example, that in flow there has to be a relevant expertise. Right? Remember, we've talked about this. The flow state is when your skills, your expertise, right, can meet the demands of the situation. If you don't have the relevant skills, you can't get into the flow state, right? So I can get into the flow state as a martial artist because I have cultivated the expertise. I can get into the flow state while lecturing because I've been doing it for 24 years. I have the relevant expertise. So what we might ask, and what you should ask me right now, you say, well, John, like, what's flowing in these higher states of consciousness? What expertise are you using? Well, what I want to argue to you is it's a fundamental kind of expertise, one that's central to your everyday experience of making sense of the world on a day-to-day basis. So this ultimately goes back to work by Merleau-Ponty, especially in the book, The Phenomenology of Perception. But the people who I'm going to most often refer to, the work of Herbert Dreyfus. Dreyfus is famous within cognitive science for bringing the work of Merleau-Ponty and others into cognitive science, and also the work of Dreyfus and Taylor. This is the Charles Taylor that we've already talked about with connection to the Axial Revolution in a book called Retrieving Realism. So what process is being optimized here? Okay. So Dreyfus and others talk about, right, what they call optimal grip. Now that's so, I mean, they mean it metaphorically because they're talking about cognition, but that is such a wonderfully felicitous term because, again, it harkens back to the conformity theory of cognition, a contact epistemology that, of course, Charles Taylor introduced us to. Now, what do they mean by that? So part of this is the idea that when let's talk about it first perceptually. When I'm trying to perceive an object, especially if I don't know what the object is initially, I don't remain static. Okay, I'm going to move around the object until I get to a place that gets into a trade-off relationship. Remember, we've talked about these trade-off relationships before. What trade-off relationship do I want? Okay, I want to get to a place where I can see as many details of the cup as possible. So that sort of zooming in, right? Oh, wow. But if I zoom in too much, I lose on the other end. I don't get a sense of the gestalt. Remember that? I don't get a sense of the overall thing. So what I do is I move the cup around so that I get a place where I get the best optimization for my needs, because it's always relative to what I'm doing. I get a best optimization between the overall grasp of the cup, its gestalt, and a grasp of its details. So I'm trying to get a dynamic balance between. That's why when you draw faces, you draw them from the perspective of the optimal grip you have on them. You represent a face in such a way, right? You draw a face in such a way that you try to get as much of the whole and as much as the detail together. You don't draw a face by like drawing someone's eyes really in detail, and you don't draw a face by zooming out, right, too far. You try and get exactly that right balance. So a lot of perception, you're unaware of this because you learned how to do this when you're like a young child. But think about, for example, again, if you're learning a martial art, okay? Just as an example. So when you're relearning how to perceive your opponent, part of what you're trying to do is try to get an optimal grip on your opponent. So, right, in Tai Chi, for example, we talk about tiger eyes. You don't want to hard focus on the person's face. One of the mistakes that many people make going into a confrontation is they hard focus on face or they hard focus on weapon. We know this from psychological research, by the way. You get people who have been held up. You know what they can give you an accurate description of? The gun, not the person who was holding them up, because they hard focus, right? They lose that soft vigilance, right? So what you want to do is you want to get the right, and it takes practice, right? You want to flow over the person. You don't want to be sort of flowing in a blurry fashion. You want to get this sense where you've got a sense of their whole body, right? But you can zero in on details. And then you also are trying to get an optimal grip on your own body. So for example, you're going to take a stance, right? And the point about the stance, right, is to try and give you an optimal sense, right? Give you an overall sense of, so now I'm aware of my whole body, right? but I'm also aware of it in connection to the details of where my fingers are, where my wrists are, what my joints are doing. And I'm taking a stance that that's multi-apt. I can easily transform it into what I need to do. I get an optimal grip. Okay? You do this cognitively. Eleanor Roche pointed this out in terms of the categories you use. So you will describe things as a cat or a dog. That's how you'll usually talk about it. You usually won't go a level up and say, oh, that's a mammal. So this creature's walking by on the road, and somebody says, hey, look at the mammal. That would be weird, right? Now, they might go down to another level, like there's the Cocker Spaniel. But generally, they're doing that because they have some intimate familiarity. Most of us would say, hey, look at the dog. Roche calls this the basic level. Why do we default to the basic level in the way we talk about? Why is this a table? Why is this a marker? Right? Why do we default to the basic level? Because it's how we get our cognitively optimal grip. You see, there's two things I want to trade off in when I'm categorizing things. Here's my category, right? I want as much similarity within the category as I can get, right? But I want as much difference between two categories. And those aren't a trade-off. Because as I go higher up, right, I get much more abstract, and I lose the specific differences. When I go down here, right, I'm getting too specific. I'm losing the broad generality. We've talked about this before. You're always trying to balance between getting, remember, the higher states of consciousness, as comprehensive and as detailed as you can. And those are always in a trade-off relationship. So you talk about dogs and cats because that's your way of getting an optimal cognitive grip on the world. Do you remember we did this? The cat. Remember we talked about how you're simultaneously going up to the gestalt and down to the detail. You're optimally gripping between the gestalt of the word and the features of the letter, and you're doing it right now. You've got a way of paying attention that allows you to read, and you had to practice that optimal gripping. You're going into a first date. What do? Well, you're trying to get a sense of the person. Now, here's where the term optimal grip is a little infelicitous, so don't read anything, misread any sexual misconduct into my use of the term. I'm using it in the technical sense. But you're trying to get an optimal grip on the other person, and it's very difficult. Notice how you're toggling your attention and your interaction. And you know this because of the kinds of advice your friends give you. They'll say things, right? I happen to be straight, so they'll say to me, for example, look into her eyes, but not too much. Smile, but not too much. Laugh, not too often. Ask questions, but not too many. And mix it up between these strategies, but not chaotically. And you're like sort of, ugh. And yet, here's the thing. You do it. It works, at least sometimes. You figure out, you find that sweet spot where you're getting the sense of the person, both as a whole and in detail. So I'm giving you multiple examples. You're always engaged because you're always trading between these trade-offs. You're always optimally gripping. So you have to do this domain general. You have to do it in every domain. When you're swimming, going on a date, reading, right, looking at an object, you're trying to get an optimal grip. And you have practiced this skill so that you're extremely proficient. You do it without realizing it. Herbert Dreyfus is one of his favorite examples. You know how close to stand to somebody. How close should you stand to somebody? in order to get an optimal grip on the interaction. There's no algorithm. It's like always stand 4 inches. That's ridiculous. Always stand 1 foot. It depends on the context. It depends on the person. But you have that skill. Most of you are not socially awkward. So, here's what I'm proposing to you. What if you didn't, what if you got into a flow state that isn't the flow state of doing a martial art? Isn't the flow state of playing music, like in jazz or something? What if what you were getting into a flow state about was your ability to optimally grip the world? What if I made it really challenging by altering your state of consciousness, disrupting your normal framing, and then opening up? Because, right, remember what's happening in this higher state. You're both opening up your attention and zeroing in to see the world in a grain of sand. What if you had this optimal grip, but it wouldn't be on just one object. It would be a dynamical, flowing, optimal grip on the world and yourself. The most comprehensive attempt to make sense. Not intellectually, theoretically, but optimally gripping reality. This deep conformity. So what I'm proposing to you is that what's happening in a higher state of consciousness is that people are flowing in their capacity to cognitively, perceptually, and even with the very machinery of their self, get an optimal grip on both the world and themselves. And that's why this relation is experienced as so intensely powerful and so intensely revealing. Now, this would help to make...
Now we are back.
We are back.
Good stuff. So we just gave us several examples for the continuity hypothesis and the priming hypothesis.
Yeah, and the continuity hypothesis would be like fluency enhancing insight, which enhances flow, which is enhanced into mystical experiences, which then enhance again into transformative. Experiences.
Yes. And so the same machinery that we use for relevance realization in our environment for survival is used to cultivate wisdom.
Yeah, Newberg argues that regular insights produce, like daily regular insights or primers for this.
Yes. Yeah, everything primes. Yeah, it's all reciprocal.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you practice a little a day.
Yeah,
does you real well, and it makes you better and better.
Yeah,
and better.
Flow enhances. So fluency enhances insight. Insight enhances flow. Flow enhances mystical experiences. Mystical insights enhance and help it trigger transformative experiences, and all of these also feed in upon themselves. So flow helps enhance fluency. Transformative experiences are imbued with deep insight. So, thus, mystical experiences, and again, more insight, fluency, flow.
Yeah, and so I guess...
And so he's given us a scientifically legitimate, plausible explanation of enlightenment and self-transformative practices and experiences.
And I guess he's doing this to, in his words, help us to begin to explain what's going on in the higher states, what is going on.
Good
there.
Examples, and then also good justification for why we should be guided by these self-transformative experiences and practices. So we get into that enhanced fluency, and this is the same machinery that we're exapting from relevance realization. We can prime this, so there's the priming hypothesis. And so this rational justification for these experiences, again, is going to allow us to perfect them in our cultures. And now we get deeper into this fundamental sense-making capacity of how we obtain an optimal grip or relation with our environments and ourselves in relation with those environments.
And one thing with the flow state that stood out to me is the flow state requires an expertise.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
like, if you're getting into the flow state within music, you have to be a fluent musician with expertise in that. Or if you're a martial artist or a public orator, or there has to be an expertise. So,
Yes, there has to be prior training involved.
yeah,
and
that's
then
in practice as well, because 10,000 hours makes the expertise. So,
yes, and the more expertise you have, the deeper you can go into the flow state.
and it almost seems like you could, use one expertise to help you cross over into another. Like, I'm a musician, and
You notice that a lot, they say.
the understanding
you achieve
of how
mastery
I
in
see
martial
music
arts, it
helped
feeds
me.
into how you play music and your capacity to understand music. And
Yeah, well, on my end, like my like I am an expert in music. I have my 10,000 hours. Not bragging, but that's where I sit. And the way I see music, and particularly when I'm in the flow state, and the problems that I can solve within there can be transposed over into other ends of life.
For sure.
I build things as well. So, music and building are real tight. Particularly when you're in the flow state and you're getting things done. And if you're working with another person and it might be just, shovelfuls of cement or something like that, but you get into a real good, back and forth flow. And by the time, you're done, everything's good. It was fucking awesome. Excuse me. Freaking awesome. But yeah, like, I think the reason why the having an expertise thing stuck out to me is because it's something you really have to work at.
it's true. That's true. Yeah.
Or have
done at
worked
least several times. Yeah. And you can
Yeah.
feel like small intimations of this. We've
Sure.
talked about the example when you throw the crumpled up piece of paper into the trash, no look behind the back, and it's
Yeah,
just
right.
perfect, right?
Yeah.
And you can achieve flow state even when you just learn 2 chords on the piano and you're playing them over and over and over again, and you start singing along or something. But it grows deeper and deeper and deeper. The more expert you are, the more trained you are, the more often you can induce the flow state, the longer you can be in it, the deeper you can be in it, the more capable you're going to be within it, all of that.
And fundamental expertise is the note I have here. But yeah, you need a fundamental expertise.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the soft vigilance, not too rigid, not too loose, to be in that optimal relation to maintain that. So he gives us a lot of examples of how we think and speak in language. We go to basically the general basic level when we're talking about something like a cat or a dog. We say, oh, there's a cat, there's a dog.
Yeah.
We don't go too specific, or too abstract and say, oh, there's a mammal. We don't go too
Yeah,
specific
like,
and say like what exact breed it is most of the time.
with its color patches and all that stuff.
Describing all the features of it or anything. And this helps us maintain an optimal grip on our environment so that we're able to account for many different things at once without taking in too much of the detail. You need to get a good picture of what's happening.
And so we have to have trade-offs. And a term you use is dynamic balance. There has so dynamic and active.
Yes, and then you see the sweet spot when you're on like a first date and it's really clicking, and there's you're getting a sense of the person, and you're learning kind of how to dance into flow with that person and how they are. What kind of space is around them, how you can move with them.
And then
So an optimal understanding and level of interaction with another person, and we also know how close to stand to somebody automatically. It's something that we learned when we were very young.
Yeah, and then we do it with ourselves too. Like you were saying, you become aware of, like, say when you take a stance in martial arts, you're gauging up the person, becoming aware of, doing the dynamic balance between seeing the whole, but also being able to focus on, say,
being
the
ready
physical.
for many different
But then
potentialities.
you can feel where your wrists are, what your position
your
is,
stance
your
also
balance.
allows you to feel your whole body. Like your whole body becomes your tool. So you're like embodying
So
your
you're
body.
kind of like going back and forth as well between the
you have awareness
yourself
of your legs, your arms,
and
where your fingers are at.
so you have an awareness of, so you're going back and forth between the being aware of the other person as well as being aware of yourself
There's
too.
that dynamical
and
interchange, that relationship, that balance that the mind is practicing being at. So right there we can see how mastery in one skill can easily map onto another in many ways. At least the capacity to enact skillfully is mapping on. So there's a level of awareness and surrender to presence and a letting go and allowing one's expertise to flow through them.
Yeah, and he brought up, it's Eleanor Roche, and the categories, like what you were saying about dog.
Categories.
Yeah, categories. That's actually how I spelled it, but categories. But Yeah, so the default that we use to optimally grasp things is dog, not mammal, because well, you need to know dog. Oh, dog, and then if you need to go further, which dog? That dog. But
Right.
it's dog. Ultimately, it's just dog. That's the default level.
So
Um,
so when you're doing this on a higher level, in a higher state of consciousness, this is the reason that it has an enhanced sense of realness, because you're taking in more of the patterns at once. Your mind is in an optimal grip with reality and your sense of self at once, and there's this dynamical interchange, and you begin to feel a comprehensive oneness, a deep conformity with one's sense of self in relation with that reality, with reality itself, let's say, with the world. So yeah, the flow state of optimal grip with reality is what we're looking to perfect, and that's what also we're gaining in realizing and cultivating these higher states of consciousness and the practices that help us employ them.
so trading off, but so these trade-offs, they allow us to see similarities and differences and come to better understanding through these similarities and differences.
Yeah, we're constantly
Like,
breaking and
as
rebuilding
you,
frames.
and as you go higher up,
Mm-hmm.
you get a much more abstract, loose, you lose some differences and gain some similarities. And like, I guess the goal would be to change
It's seeing all of that at once.
and change things as much as possible and get as many differences as possible. So then the similarities, like, cause if you have things, if you change things all the time, you'll start to get a grasp at what stays the same. And I think at the end of this, he starts talking about that. But like, you use differences and similarities to come to a grasp in the sense of like, I don't know, say you're having problems with social gatherings, right? Well, then you'd go out to a bunch of different kinds of social gatherings and then figure out it's like, well, it wasn't just, the obnoxious people drinking, and it wasn't just that because that changed and that changed. The one similar thing was this, whatever it may be. So if you can change it up and change it up and change it up and change it up, the things that are most real are the things that are going to be the same through each iteration. And the more iterations you do with differences, the more
by understanding
solid the
and becoming
understanding
familiar
of,
with those different modes of being that you're inhabiting, that other people are inhabiting in these environments, you learn how to surf through those moments more reliably. You start to understand that, okay, there's like threads, common threads that are going through everything, and here's how I can interrelate with this experience.
Yeah, and so
yeah, it's all about sharpening, priming our reciprocal relation with reality.
Yeah, and what we're doing when
Or
we
dancing with it.
Yeah, when we're doing this, it's not algorithmic. It's not like
it comes from dancing with to dancing as, and it's paradoxical. There's a sense of the oneness, a comprehensive sense of oneness and interconnectedness. There's also fine detail, acuity that is constantly available, and it's all seamless. It's like you're freed up because you're decentered from the egoic perspective, and everything's just apparent automatically without needing to be deeply comprehended in the moment. It's just automatic now.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful state, and
the question he asks is, what if we get into the flow state, but doing it about optimally gripping the world? So not just musically or martial artsly, but do it
with the world. Yes.
So yeah,
that's the goal of this whole thing is to
getting into the flow state of understanding the world.
Yes, and into relation with the world as the world. Yes.
Yeah. So not just playing the notes in the music and getting that, but no, like playing the notes of the world and the universe and the understanding of it in that sense. And
yes,
I think
the goal is to expand out into the universe as well as dive all the way in within oneself to find out what is congruent, what is the same through all of it. And
yeah, he used the term
cultivate from there.
Deep conformity. So it's like like to wrap around, to conform in that sense, not to conform in the sense of like, everybody to do the same thing, but to form yourself around very deeply.
As comprehensively and detailed as we can, balancing both. Yes.
and
Yes.
cognitively and experientially as well.
Yes.
You know?
Well, understanding how it's working in our cognition and our psychology is very helpful for us. I mean, it's going to be helpful for science and understanding how consciousness works, but
Well,
it's certainly helpful for us as individuals
once
to
we understand
how we tick.
Yeah, so scientifically, once we understand it scientifically, we'll be able to start to create better, more accurate psychotechnologies and fine tune the ones that we've already have and have already developed throughout the development of our species. So now this is like taking the next step.
Yeah,
Now
first step is legitimizing and actually helping the scientific community admit and see, okay, higher levels of consciousness.
it's not just
only
hocus
real,
pocus; it's a real
we've been
thing, and it's an
practicing them
important.
for thousands of years. It's very important and central to how we operate as human beings and in our wider tribes and cultures and as a globe now. So this is the good stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Dynamic flowing with the world. Name of the game.
so now we're at the last hoorah.
Radio. All right, guys, we're jumping back in.
Now, this would help to make sense of things because, again, if there's a deep continuity between the higher states of consciousness and things like flow and insight, that would help to explain why the disruptive strategies are so important for getting into the higher states of consciousness, because disruptive strategies are central, as I mentioned, to insight. You have to break up the bad framing. Now, you can do that by using mindfulness and breaking frame. You also are naturally disposed to do this. Your mind wanders. Your mind distracts you from your task. And many of us find this annoying. It's like, why can't I keep my mind on something? But why is mind wandering so hardwired into us? And one of my former students and now colleague and good friend, Zach Irving, is becoming one of the world experts on mind wandering. I would point you to his work if you want to go into it in depth. What I would want to say for here, and I think Zach would agree with me on this, is that one of the things that mind wandering does is it enhances your capacity for insight. Because by distracting you from how you've framed a situation, it can help you return and break up that fixated frame. And there's work by Siegel and others showing that moderate amounts of distraction actually enhance your cognitive flexibility. The reason why we mind wander, amongst other reasons, I'm not saying it's the sole reason, but one of the things it does is it helps disrupt our framing so that we can break frame and make a new frame. That's often why, and this is why people have built a whole mythology around incubation. Go and sleep on it, or go for a walk, or take a shower. Basically what you're doing is a disruptive strategy of distraction, right? As I mentioned, you can more deliberately engage in a disruptive strategy through mindfulness practices. We know experimentally that if you give a person problem and you introduce entropy, noise into the problem, a moderate amount, that can help them have an insight. And we know, for example, that when your brain is engaging in insight, there's good reason to believe, as I've mentioned, that there's a significant shift, we talked about this, between the left and the right hemisphere. That's an internal disruptive strategy. So your brain has all these strategies, and you can learn some psychotechnologies that enhance all this powerful disruption. So the disruptive machinery that's integral to insight can be exapted and enhanced to bring about a higher state of consciousness. So what all of these disruptive strategies do with insight is what's called de-automatization. So you remember with the 9-dot problem, you automatically, and remember this because we're going to need this when we talk about other things like Stoicism, you automatically, unconsciously saw it as a square. You framed it in terms of the square. You automatically, unconsciously, right, formulated it as a connect the dot to the problem. And then that automatic framing blocks you from solving it. And in order to get out of that, you have to de-automatize your cognition. Now, we talked about this when we talked about attentional scaling and mindfulness. Just reminding you that what's happening in these disruptive strategies is very significant de-automatization. Something else is going on with these disruptive strategies. What these disruptive strategies do is they increase the variation in your processing. Often by introducing a lot of noise, right? A lot of entropy into your processing. You're increasing the variation in what you're paying attention to, what processes you're activating in your brain. You're just increasing the variation. Now, why is increasing variation good? Increasing variation is good because when I increase the variation, what I can do is get more awareness, right, of what's invariant. The more I vary what I'm doing, the more I become aware of what's not changing, right? So as I move around this object, right, lots of stuff is varying, but its shape is remaining constant to me throughout the variation, and that's why I think of the shape as more real, because it's invariant through all this variation. So when I increase the variance, I'm more able to pick up on what's invariant. Now the thing we need to know is that there are two kinds of invariance, two kinds of things that are not changing in your attempts to get a grip on the world. There's good invariance and bad invariance. Okay. What's good invariance? By opening up the variation, I pick up on bigger patterns that aren't changing, that are real patterns in the world. This is what goes on in deep learning networks, right? You pick up on much more complex patterns of invariance. You get more in contact with what's really going on. Again, think about what you do when you want to make sure what something is. You increase the variation. Not only am I looking at it, I'm touching it. I increase the variation to find out what's invariant, because if I have increased variation and I find out what's invariant in it, that often tells me what's more real. That's good, right? So that can get me real patterns. But there's also bad invariance. Bad invariance, right, is like what's happening when you're trying to solve the 9-dot problem. You keep trying to solve it, and you keep failing to solve it, because there's something you need to change that you're not changing. Bad invariants are ways in which you're formulating your problems, framing your experience, that's actually blocking you from solving your problem. So Kaplan and Simon in 1990 talked about a heuristic, a strategy we use called the notice invariance heuristic. This is the idea. Across all of your different problem formulations that are failing, you keep doing this, and and I can't get it, I can't get it, I can't get it. When you increase the variation, you can then apply the notice invariance heuristic. What am I not changing in all of these failures? What am I not changing in all of my failed framings? Because very often, what you're not changing is precisely what you need to change. And so the notice invariance heuristic can help you break bad framing that has been causing your failure. Now this, of course, requires humility on your part. This is why there's a deep connection between wisdom and humility, I would suggest. Paying attention, remembering your failures, such that you can apply this, would be very helpful. Now, let's talk about, this is one problem they were talking about, Kaplan and Simon. But what if I don't just have one error here, but I have a whole system of errors? So very often, when you look at cognitive development, right, you take the 2-year-old, sorry, 4-year-old, because they can count. You count out the 5 candies. They can count. They know that there's 5 here and there are 5 here, but they will reliably choose that row, 5 candies. Why? Because the amount of space taken up is super salient to them. We've talked about this before. It misleads them. But they don't just make this error with candies. They make this error systematically. They make this error all over the place in many different domains. It is a systematic error. So I can reliably predict that the 4-year-old will not only be making this error, they'll be making errors about seriation, about trying to line objects up in terms of increasing height. They'll have difficulties, etc. So it's not just one error, it's an entire system of errors. And the way you go through a developmental change, what kids do, is they find, right, they find a systematic pattern of errors, and they find an insight that's not just about one problem, but an insight that will apply systematically to that, all of those interconnected, interrelated errors. And when they have that systematically penetrative insight, when they've found that nexus of errors so they can massively intervene on themselves, then they go through a developmental change and they grow up cognitively. They mature. And that is what can be going on in the enlightenment experience. By opening up the variation massively, you can not only connect to what's more real and feel more connected to the world, remember the world, you can get below the ways in which you are being held back in your own development. You can zero in on the systematic errors and afford a radical developmental change. As the adult is to the child, the sage is to the adult. You can go through, you can get one of the hallmarks of wisdom, what McGee and Barber called seeing through illusion into what is real. Okay, so we're still not done this discussion because this is pivotal, trying to understand these higher states of consciousness. It's pivotal to understanding the power, the legacy of the actual revolution, and therefore what we need to salvage from it. We do not believe in its two-world mythology, but we cannot afford to abandon all of this powerful psychotechnology of intervention, of self-transformation, of self-transcendence, of the cultivation of wisdom, and ultimately the deep enhancement of meaning in life by bringing about a developmental harmony within and a powerful conformity and connectedness to the world without. So next time, I want to continue and complete the discussion about the higher states of consciousness. Thank you very much for your time.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, 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 meow.
Why is mind wandering so beneficial?
Meow, meow, meow. Good question. Good question. Turn off autoplay.
No
I just-
autoplay.
Just need to turn off the gosh darn autoplay. That's the problem. All right, anyway, we're back. What's up, guys? Let us know on Spotify what you thought of this episode. We'll be getting into part 2 of this section on higher states of consciousness next week, so definitely be tuning into that. Like and subscribe if you guys are enjoying the show. I'm going to do a quick summarization of what we saw there in that last bit.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out where my notes leave off. Do you
So my
know
first
where-
note is
Here
the
we are.
question of why is mind wandering beneficial, and
Yeah,
the
right.
reason that will be explained is
There it is.
it enhances the capacity for insight,
Mm-hmm. We're
Yeah,
breaking the frame.
and it helps us, like, so when you get mind distracted, you have to return back to yourself and break your
Yes.
framing again.
Yeah, so it helps us break up like
Yeah.
overly rigid
Mhm.
frames and helps us be more flexible in our comprehension of reality in the world.
It's like
So yeah, we'll sleep on it. Sometimes we have these disruptive strategies that we use. That's why mindfulness is so helpful, because it's a deliberate disruption
or like,
strategy.
like when I have to think about something, I'm working something out, I'll go to, used to go to like a coffee shop or, sit out in the garden at my local bar or something like that. And there would just be enough chatter and distraction. So it's like when, my brain's getting stuck on something and I'm like having the moment. Oh, somebody says hi. Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of variation in your
Yeah,
environment.
yeah, and then okay, now I can come back to it, and there. Why didn't I see that
And
before?
so ways of focusing our attention help us generate insight. So these are de-automation practices. We can see how we have automatic ways of framing reality that block us from seeing reality accurately, such as the 9-dot problem. There's 9 dots basically in a square. It's like 3 dots, 3 dots, 3 dots. So it looks to our brains like a square, and that 9-dot problem, in solving it, how can you solve it in so many lines without picking up the pen? And it looks easy, but it ends up being really hard. You have to draw outside of the perceived lines, the illusion that your mind is creating. And we do this all of the time. And this is what happens when we become ideologically possessed. I remember we discussed that when we were talking about the last episode on consciousness. So these disruption strategies help increase variation in processing and helps us raise our awareness of what's invariant in our environments, what's not changing, what is constant. So they help strengthen our sense of optimal grip and optimal relation, our capacity to dance with reality. So you have good invariances, picking up on the bigger, real, complex patterns, granting us a sense of being more in contact with what's really going on, because we are actually recognizing real patterns. And then we can have bad framing that is blocking, and we have to recognize what is the invariance here. So the notice invariance heuristic allows us to say, what have I not been changing in my variations?
Well, so the bad,
there's a systematic a system of errors that's occurring here.
Yeah.
And we need humility. Humility helps us break our framing.
Yeah, so
you're willing to break your frame, and you're not holding on and attached to it. I identified with it.
They call it the invariance heuristic.
Mm-hmm.
What is the thing that is not changing, and that'll help prevent you from going into the creating false framings.
Yes.
Like the ever excuse. Well, it's not that I'm not the asshole douchebag. No, it's everybody else. Well,
this is why we need humility.
If you
if you recognize our parts,
like say film yourself in every interaction, you'll realize, oh well, that's the one thing. What's the saying? It's like, if every girl's rejecting you, it's not them, dude.
Right.
It's you.
Yeah.
Why don't you go use that invariant heuristic on yourself and get yourself straight?
It's helpful, man. It's so helpful for us, though. Yeah.
Well, I can see the resistance against it, because, like you said, it does take humility.
It takes humility,
which is not.
That's a powerful insight. It's a powerful argument for goodness and honesty. You can't develop your wisdom fully unless you have the humility to be willing to break your frames of perception.
Mm-hmm.
But when we become too identified to our frames of perception,
well, even to admit when you're wrong,
become egocentric, more narcissistic environments start to fester.
Yeah, because to have an idea is one thing, but to hold on to it so tightly that you can't say if it's a bad idea, you can't realize it's a bad idea.
Yeah, you want cognitive flexibility. Yeah. We're trying to figure out really complex problems within ourselves and within the wider world.
And we get personally offended when, just naturally the first thing to happen when you realize you're wrong about something is go, huff. And then you move through it and you go, okay.
Yeah, we don't like our assumptions to be corrected. But if we're willing, actually, if we recognize, oh, wait, I'm just trying to find out what's good for one and all. What matters most is not me being right, but what is right. Then that orientation really helps us. That's an orientation to develop wisdom rather than to be stuck in rigid frames.
It's a healthy salience landscape, if you will.
Yes.
You're avoiding
And we need this so bad as a species right now. We need this so bad, because not only are we harming ourselves internally, but we are harming our civilizations, our cultures, our capacities for long-term survival on this planet together.
Even here yet.
Yeah, that the promise and the potential greater levels of peace and accord with one another. Um, yeah, we don't want to wipe out these possibilities. We want to create the potential, all the potential that we can, for us to generate insight together. This is a broad project, and it's okay to be wrong. You're just going to find out why that is not useful information or helpful or accurate, and because we're just trying to figure out how to live together here in increased higher states and higher optimal states of communion and coexistence. We want to live joyfully together, truly. We want to feel more of the good, and that be more of our lives. And that can be our lives. That's kind of like a hidden secret. That actually living your whole truth is the way.
It takes work. It takes
a lot of work. Yeah.
So it's, how do we encourage anti-laziness, if you will? I don't know what the word for it would be, but the opposite of laziness, because laziness is there for a reason. You need to be able to take time and let yourself defrag and incubate on things a little bit, but
yes.
then
but we also need to be engaged.
And be willing to be uncomfortable, because the more amount of uncomfortable experiences you can put yourself in, the more comfortably you can be anywhere.
Absolutely.
Like if you've ever spent any period of time sleeping on the ground or the floor or in bad conditions or whatever, you can get comfortable just about anywhere. Same thing with if you've got peopling issues and you have a hard time being around people, you put yourself in a bunch of different situations with people and you get a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
Living a life without the negative emotions and bad feelings and pain doesn't make you more comfortable. Like being in the palace that services all your having needs does not make you more comfortable. What makes you more comfortable is experiencing uncomfortability, humbling yourself, going
all the
through
nice
that
stuff.
process. Because
all the sensory pleasure that you can get does not fill the void in one's soul. To feel that we're in a sense of interrelation with our environments, a deep sense of interrelation. And so yeah, that's all I had to say there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're looking at how to develop ways to find insight into what is good applies to one and all. So we want to find the nexus of errors within ourselves, such as with the example that he gave of the children thinking that 7 candy spaced apart looks like more than 7 candy close together.
Yeah, and it's just
because it's more salient. It looks bigger,
well,
but that doesn't mean it necessarily is. So we grow up, we mature as we are opening our capacity for variation and framing and reciprocal realization.
Yeah, so I guess the attempt of all of this is to become more aware of our systemic errors or systematic errors.
Yes, so that we can be more connected.
Or a system of errors.
Yeah. Understand how we are connected, understand ourselves, understand how to zero in and play on that dynamic, play in that dynamic dance. And I like how he said, such as the adult is to the kid, the sage is to the adult. The sage is the ultimate human capacity.
Yeah.
And we've seen it exhibited so many times as the heroes in so many myths and all the great stories that we love. It's a warrior, it's a wizard, it's a humble person taking on a great challenge with immense courage, and that inspires that more connection. And so let's keep on telling these stories so we can help one another see through the illusions that we become prey to. I love how he said this is pivotal to understanding higher states of consciousness and how humans achieve them and practice them and develop them. It's pivotal to understand, and the Axial Revolution's way of incorporating this into their lives is something that we do want to hold on to and bring back to life, so that we can develop that harmony within ourselves and that deep sense of interconnectivity with the world around us. Yeah. Then we will have the meaning that we seek, because we are going through a meaning crisis. There's a higher sense of meaninglessness for a lot of people.
Nobody
right
can
now.
do it for you either, which is the thing. It's not a service that you can hire out for. It's something yeah, you can hire a guru or a self-help guy that's gonna, like a life coach or whatever, but at the end of the day,
They're still
you
just
gotta
helping
do
you
it
do the work within
because
yourself
you
if they're good
gotta
at it.
do it.
Yeah.
You know, that's where we're birthed into an egalitarian age, as in the sense of you have to do
Yes.
you, I have to do me, and we should all have, share these techniques, these insights, these inspirations, so we all can
Yeah, I have to do
become
you,
better
and
at
you have to do
grasping the
me,
world and grasping each other and
hmm
getting all of this
But
together.
I am you and you are
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
That too.
Well, and
Like,
ultimately,
it's
everything we do for other people, we do for ourselves. But the things we
Yes.
do for ourselves and the work we do on ourselves, we do for other people.
you're really doing it for
So
the world.
It's
Yes.
not one or the other. It's both and.
No, yeah, you
know,
are
it's-
the world,
Yeah.
and that's and the world is you.
Yes. We are the world, everybody.
Actually,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah. In action.
We are
quite
the
literally.
animate
We're
extensions of life
the
on this
world
planet.
worlding.
Yes, we are the Earth's self-reflective extensions, interrelating, speaking for the trees and the butterflies, the bees, even the sharks and the tigers. And we're helping our environments and one another live in higher states of communion, optimal progression and growth, while maintaining our tried and true. We're trying to figure out how to do this, all of us together, all of us many varied beings that are actually this one thing, with something like many eyes and many minds and many hearts working together, all self-aware, like separate extensions, yet interrelated, all feeding into one, all building off one another. We utilize the language that we have grown together. We utilize the insights, capacities, ways of being and acting and dressing and seeing that we pick up and share with one another. And that's a beautiful dance.
It makes sense, if the world's gonna world and life is gonna life, like you have to make every iteration you possibly can, and this iteration of life builds things and wears things that were woven out of other things, and I won't say looks at things in the world as tools, but has the capacity to see affordances, and that's sittable, that's
Yes, thanks to
hide
all those that came
underable,
before
that's-
us that
yeah.
helped craft the ways of understanding the world, of weaving clothing, of building buildings, developing language. And now that these psychotechnologies that help us enhance our insight and sense of connectivity,
It almost seems
marriage with the world.
It almost seems like life, and you could go, we're going to use this as the default base point. This is dog life. The reason why we're conscious and cognizant the way we are is because life, that seems to be this pinnacle so far of life. Life has been working itself to get to the point where it can move the world in itself like we do.
Yeah.
We're not just the dominant species on this planet.
No,
just
no, no.
because we're
We're
efficient predators or
actually
anything. We're thinkers, and life wants
Earth's
to be a
evolution, life
Yeah.
itself, that has become self-reflective.
Yeah.
The self-reflective, aware part of this planet is what
So it's
we
like
are.
consciousness is part of life's evolution.
Yes.
It's not just something we have because we're special and
No,
we
we're
have
like
it.
the
No,
cutting
it's-
edge of Earth, but it doesn't mean that we're better than. We're just the most self-reflective and self-aware and capable of stewardship. Thus, we must be humble and recognize how interconnected we are.
And we probably won't be the longest lasting either, because it seems like like crocodilians and stuff like that, they've got a pattern that works, but there's
Right.
not even though crocodiles can, the crocodilian alligators and crocodiles, they can be relatively intelligent as far as lizard beasts and stuff go, and quite friendly. They don't change. The basic body structuring and what a shark does has not changed in a long time. But sharks are one of our oldest species. So, or like
We've learned how to evolve through ideas as
Yeah,
well,
and,
like evolve through our software.
and we've only been Homo sapiens sapien for like 200,
200,000
300,000 years, something like that.
Yeah,
And hominids have only been here for how long?
right.
It's very short, but we're very dynamic.
Yeah,
We're an extremely dynamic species, and in the way we think and the way we evolve within our cognitive processes are very dynamic and very
Yes.
quick.
and we have
and
great
very powerful.
power now.
Yeah.
Super powerful at affecting the world and each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, we have a greater responsibility for how we utilize that power now.
Yeah, well, we have the ability to respond. That's
We are the
much greater than it's ever
caretakers.
been.
We are the stewards.
Yeah.
And I love what you were talking about there with egalitarianism, that the age of egalitarian, of Aquarians,
Yeah.
and egalitarianism that we're going into. It's not just the sexes becoming more in union with one another. It is actually everything about us, our belief systems, everything is coming into an interconnected harmony with one another.
Well,
We're figuring out how to tune them in with one another.
Well, I think
And so that's happening culturally. It's happening on so many levels, and that's
my idea on this is
an inspiring thing to see.
It comes down to individual egalitarianism. Like, we all have the same access to massive amounts of information. We have access to beautiful lectures like this. For the most part, we have access to food and shelter. But personally, each individual now has to rise to the age and use these techniques to become
we get to
part
now
of
come
this.
together and
and
utilize
also
all these techniques
the
together.
responsibility is spread out now too. We don't have, lords and
Oh, yeah,
ladies and
This is just a beautiful dance.
Yeah.
Is really what it is, and it's just
But-
us letting our egos down enough to be able to engage in this dance together.
and where the equality aspect isn't equality like we would normally talk about it now. It's equal responsibility now. We
Yes.
have the ability to respond now.
And
we
equal
should.
treatment and equal responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
the days of just complaining about that it was the other guy that's doing all the crap. No, ultimately it comes down to the individual you.
Yeah.
It
This is the way that humans have always worked best, and we've developed this, and we've optimized
well,
this
like
over
what I
hundreds
was
of thousands
saying
of
while
years.
we were
you know.
outside, the last age
That's
of
why we
Aquarius.
develop partnerships.
What is it, like 24,000 years ago was the last age of Aquarius, because it's 12 and each one is 2,000 years or something. So the last time we were at the upper Paleolithic, 24,000 years ago. Okay, maybe not then, but we were, what was the terms I used? Okay, so at that point in time, we were coming to grasp at the worlds and the monsters within it.
Mm-hmm.
And we all individually were doing that and realizing our individual place in the world. Probably along the period of time where people started recognizing, oh, what happens in the world is not because, the gods are angry at me or whatever proto-gods are angry at me. No, it's because of, things are not angry at me, but just like displeased, and you can appease them. No, actually the things I'm doing are messing up things around it. It's probably about that period of time.
Right.
The responsibility was on the person to figure out their shit within reality. Now we're getting back to the point where, well, here we are again, trying to figure out our place in the world and the monsters within it. But now we're realizing we're the monsters more and more. We don't have the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, eating us anymore. We don't have the forces of nature killing us as much as it used to. It can be hot outside, but we have air conditioning now. Like there's volcanoes are still a thing, but natural, like, bad storms don't kill people like they used to. So nature's not even a threat to us as much as it used to be. We're the
Still
greatest
big
threat
time,
to
though.
ourselves.
We are, though.
So and but that gives us a lot of power as well, because if it's us that's the threat, well, we know us and we're able to work on us. We can't do much about like what the weather's going to do. If the weather wants to storm, it's going to storm.
We're an incredibly innovative species, so we can find ways to solve.
Well, it's
the other problems
empowering
together.
realizing that the responsibility comes down to us, comes down to me for my own end, opposed to it being something else or somebody else that's doing it to me or to us. No, it's us. So we can do something about it because it's us. Because we are
don't
us.
just let the power hungry become the ones that decide which direction this world goes.
Well, because the
This
power
is gonna
hungry
take
don't care
millions
about
of
us;
us
they care
together.
about me.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
Not
problem.
me, but like the me.
That's the problem,
Yeah.
and they're really good at playing these systems of divide and conquer.
And if you have
divide and
enough
rule.
power and resource, you can play that game because you're not as dependent on other people directly, because you have enough might, power, resource, whatever you want to just go ahead and make sure that you got you. Whereas like the normal people, everybody on the normal level, we really need each other.
We do.
Like if your shop in town closes down, well, now we got, Amazon and all that stuff, but if your shop in town closes down, you ain't getting eggs that day.
Yes, this is why
You know?
disruptive strategies are so important. Strategies that help us break our frames, our senses of reality, because we are developing magnified, magnified senses of self-importance, and the ego is basically being coaxed
Mm,
out right now in our societies in
sure.
attempts to control us. It's like the sophists are superpowered now.
So
So
they're
we
losing their
we need to
power
be
and they're
willing
freaking out. But yeah,
to give up the misidentification with our images, with our ideas, with our attached ideals, and be willing to grow together in a harmony and concert in a reciprocal process
hmm
as people.
well, that's a key word right there. Is reciprocal. Like our process can't just be
We need to exact that
one
relevance
way or
realization,
the other.
that
It's
reciprocal knowing capacity.
yeah,
We need to ratchet that up because we
yeah.
have it within us. We also have it collectively. We have collective sense making capacities.
Yeah, well, we're better collectively. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
um,
You're going to be covering more angles, and you
yeah,
got to do that when you're trying to build sound structures of any
yeah,
kind.
yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes you could have too many chefs in the kitchen, but
Yeah, but
we
give up your
know,
ideas.
yeah,
Question everything.
yeah,
Challenge your own self-conceptions. Challenge your beliefs.
yeah. And
Figure out how to argue against them so you can argue for
mm,
them if they end up being true. Don't believe anything that anybody tells you until you've looked into it deeply for yourself and understood the different perspectives on it and found what's good for one and all.
and you
Only then shall we live up to it.
and you can entertain an idea without having to believe it, and that's like so.
That's the
If
idea.
somebody's coming
Yeah.
at you with some like
Don't
I
be
don't know,
totally certain on anything. Just
yeah,
have levels of
yeah,
certainty.
it's like okay, I'll entertain that because like you are making a persuasive argument
Yeah.
that so,
Well, that
but
seems likely.
so and then I'll look more into
However,
it, and
perhaps,
then
yeah.
and
Let's
then
also look at this. Yeah.
yeah, and then take your time to look into it, and then find the holes in it, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But
Yes,
you don't
'cause
get
there
that.
are manipulators out there trying to manipulate.
Yeah.
They make money off of it. They
And-
gain power and control over
and
it.
I
It's
hope-
a global game now.
I hope there always are to a certain degree because if we don't have
Well, I mean that we
if
need
we don't
that,
have
yeah.
some type of like pushback to keep us sharp,
Sure.
then we get lazy, and then there eventually
Sure.
will be
Grist for the mill,
again,
yeah.
and they'll be even better at it because we'll be lazy and soft and squishy, kind of like what has happened to our societies. They've gotten lazy, soft, and squishy,
gotta
and we
continually
forgot
challenge
we
ourselves,
forgot
yeah.
actually how much the universe wants to kill you in every
Yeah.
form, and how hard it actually really is. And I'm grateful to live now. Like it's nice. I can get antibiotics if I get a bumped tooth. It won't kill me no more. I have the Library of Alexandria in my pocket.
Yeah,
A lot of really
interactive too.
wonderful, awesome people that I can meet and see and do. We've got the best instruments we've ever had. So playing music is great.
Oh yeah,
you know.
yeah. Jesse from my band, American Dharma. We got a show coming New Year's Eve,
There we
December
go.
31st. At some point in human time
Yeah.
in history,
This year
there's going to be a show at R&K Pub in Hagerstown with American Dharma. Jesse and I were talking about
is that R
the invention of
NK or
he was
R-
watching a documentary, or he read a book on the invention of the electric guitar and how much that has changed history is amazing. And it's just one person, two multiple people working together ultimately, but
So real quick though, so if people want to
Cool
find
story.
it, is it RNK or is it R
I wish
and
I could
K?
remember the name of the damn book now. R and K.
R and K.
R and K Pub in Hagerstown.
Hagerstown.
Yeah. Our band American Dharma is going to
On
be
New
rocking
Year's
out.
Eve.
Be playing with Disfigure and Light Upon Darkness, I believe, and one TBA still.
And if we got any
Haven't heard if
metalheads
there's
out
another
there,
band coming
come on
out yet.
out.
Yeah, it's going to be a hard rock, heavy show.
Yeah, we'll probably be the
We are
latest thing
going
there, and
to
we still go pretty sludgy.
Rock into the new year in flames.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the notes I got, and it's getting on about that time.
Indeed. This has been a good episode. Thank you
Mhm.
guys
Looking
for
for part
tuning in
2.
with us. Yeah, look forward to part 2 of Higher States of Consciousness. We're just going to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole. But look forward to John Vervaeke breaking down why these psychotechnologies, why plant medicines and psychedelics and fasting and prayer and meditation, all of these things are actually so helpful, so pivotal to our understanding and our capacity to optimize with our environments and help us awaken from the meaning crisis that our species now finds itself in.
The age
So
of
many
Aquarius.
words and syllables. It's been fun. It's been real.
And
We
it's
love
been
you
really
guys. All these things at once, simultaneous, like. Yeah. We're going to get off to find some food and get some rest, and I hope you guys are doing well out there. Happy holidays to everybody. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share the show with friends and fam if you like what's going on here, and we will see you next time.
Peace.